Last night, I was at a Grace Cathedral service for the interfaith community. We came together for a multi-faith prayers for the nation. And if you've been to Grace, you know the very long set of stairs right in front of the cathedral. I was walking up and I noticed at the very top of the building, they had actually painted in light the outside of the cathedral in red, white, and blue. And then as I entered and I gathered among the clergy, the conversations that were had, they were mixed with fear and trepidation and resolve. And I know 80% of San Francisco did not vote the way the rest of the nation did. And I know 16% of our city did vote with the other 74 million people of our nation. And the service, it was about the election and the nation, but it was not about the outcome. The service, it had been planned before the election. There was nothing partisan about the service. No candidates' names were mentioned. But we came together to pray and to meditate not on what America had been, not on what it was, but on what it could be. But that fear, it wasn't just a feeling. It showed up in the prayers that were spoken. It's shown up in conversations that I've had over the past few days and over the past few weeks. And the fears are real. And the list of fears, it's not short. They're fears of the erosion of democratic institutions, fears of civil unrest and violence, fears of threats to minority rights. Concerns have been raised about potential rollbacks of women's rights and LGBTQ plus individuals, environmental concerns, immigration policies, concerns about mass deportations and the construction of detention facilities, media freedom and misinformation, public health management, social cohesion, education policies, healthcare access, voting rights, reproductive rights. And I could go on. There's more. And all of these fears are real. And they're all based in what has been talked about during the campaign and based upon what has happened to women's rights in these last few years. And the things about these fears is that they're inextricably linked to the pain that people are experiencing right now. Because the fear is directly connected to the very core of people's identities being attacked. My sister and her wife, they live in Wisconsin and they have 2 daughters. And we ask, will her family be taken apart? It's horrifically painful and scary. If my daughter is pregnant in a few years or in a decade, and she travels to see family in Texas, and she has an issue, will she be cared for? It's beyond scary. Now, pain, it's not something we can fast track to just getting over. These things, they're a process and they take time. And rabbinic tradition, it knows this. When we're in our deepest pain, when we lose someone and we're mourning, the rabbis, they develop a system of first sending the mourner into a cocoon of comfort for the first week. We call this a shiva. You don't leave your home and people, they come to you. And they try to find where the ground is again. And then once you have your feet set on that earth again, you then move into shloshim. You count the first month. And then you count every single day of the first year. And it's a slow process, but it's a process that works, and it's a process that heals. When we come together as a community tonight, There are those that feel that pain. And I even had someone say to me just yesterday, it dawned on me that I was grieving. Now, there are others here tonight who are not grieving. Others who just see this, it's just another election. And there's others that sees this as a time of hope and a way forward. And we're all in the same room. That's the magical thing about Emanu-El. Now that room is filled with those that are in mourning and those that are hopeful. Hopeful that this is what will keep Israel safe. Hopeful that this is what will help the economy to help those who can't even buy bread today. But just like in any house of Shiva, not everyone is in mourning, but we are one community and we stand with each other, even though we may be in radically different spots. The other reaction that I keep hearing to the fear is anger. When Jacob steals the blessing from his brother Esau, Esau was way more than hurt. He was furious. And Jacob and Esau, they didn't make up that week or that month or that year. It took 20 years. They went from anger and pain to not being able to be in the same town or even in the same room, to eventually, 20 years later, falling into each other and kissing. But the first and the most important step is sitting with each other, seeing each other, and hearing each other. And you see, it's not the first time that our nation has been deeply divided. When William Strauss and Neil Howe, when they introduced their theory in 1997 called the fourth turn, showing that 83-year cycle of crashes in the fourth generation, you don't only have to look at your present, but you actually can go back and look at your past for guidance. Because it was 83 years ago in 1942 when we were in World War II, but it was 83 years before that when we were in a civil war. A time when our nation was far more divided than it is today. We were at a nation at war over our values. And the leader of that time was Abraham Lincoln, arguably one of the great leaders in our nation's history, who lived at the very heart of division, and he found a way forward. Abraham Lincoln wrote in his diary in 1862, when America was in the depths of the Civil War, the Union had been defeated a second time at Bull Run. And the idea that the North was going to win, it seemed like this remote impossibility that was never going to happen. So when Lincoln was alone, it's not public, it's by himself, it's sitting in his diary, and he's just writing to himself, just trying to understand the moment that he's in. He wrote something and he titled it, A Meditation on Divine Will. And this is what he wrote, quote, "The will of God prevails. In great contests, each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Now, both may be, and one must be wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time. In the present civil war, it is quite possible that God's purpose is something different from the purpose of either party." Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out in his book, Morality, that it's this diary entry that lets us into the mind of this great man and the exceptional thought that was beginning to be born at that moment. Even though Lincoln was convinced that ending slavery was the right and morally necessary thing to do, he refused to blame the other side for the war, even in his most personal and private writings. It was not us versus them. Rather, his opponent was an incredibly important actor in this moral drama that Lincoln found himself in. And instead of demonizing the other, he found that without the other, there was no opportunity for growth in helping America become close to what it ought to be. Because without the South, we never would have had the opportunity to end slavery. It was the moment for us as a nation to define our values. We all stand on the shoulders of our ancestors who came before us, who worked to make America what it is today. James Q. Wilson argued in 1985 in his book Crime and Human Nature that if you look at the first half of the 19th century in America, specifically between 1820s and the 1830s, there was a rise in cities. There had become a large concentration of single men in those cities. And in those areas, there was a steep rise in drunkenness and crime. And what happened in response to this collapsing of society was a massive remoralization of society, led by religious groups that became known as the Second Great Awakening. And it was these religious groups, they wouldn't sit down and accept America as it was or as it had been, but they knew what it could be. This Second Great Awakening, this is what led to the abolition of slavery. This is what led to the establishment of public schools. And this was the direct influence on Reform Judaism with a strong focus on tikkun olam. You see, that's what's needed from us. To see that we have a common set of values, and that when we see those being attacked or undermined, it's us as a collective that will work to fight for principles, for morals, and we don't do it alone, we do it together. If there is civil unrest and violence, we will fight for peace. If there are threats to minority rights and LGBTQ plus individuals and families are targeted, we will fight for equality for all. If there are mass deportations or detention facilities, we will remind everyone that we were once strangers in a strange land, and they are us. We will continue to fight for a woman's right to make her own choices about her own body. And we do it with other religious and spiritual leaders across our city and across our nation. Because we're never, ever going to accomplish this as the I, but we'll only be able to do it as a we. We are a nation that has a history of individualism, and when that individualism becomes bigger and bigger, that is when you have the erosion of ethics. It becomes the fuel that feeds the great awakenings that have enabled our nation to become closer to what our founders dreamed of. Today, this week, many sit in the sanctuary, not just in fear, but in deep pain and profound anger. And that's real. And so is the need for us to work as a collective, to actualize our values in this nation. God, hear our prayer and guide us. As we sit in this sanctuary and online, feel our pain, feel our anger, feel our fear, feel our hope, feel our resolve, and guide us to no longer see the other as the other or the I as an I. But ultimately, let us see that we're one people, we are one nation under God. And as time passes and we begin to find the earth beneath our feet again, give us the strength and the resolve to reach and to yearn for the promises, not of what America was and not of what America is, but of what America could be. A land of justice, a land of love, a land of equality, a land of what America's highest ideals ought to be. Amen.